Thank you for watching Amir 5858. I am Amir. I am thankful to all news resources. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Australian, African, and Asian channels, and of course, news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the news headlines. Donald Trump immunity trial in Supreme Court and hush money trial in New York. New York court overturned rape conviction. Ukraine town Kharkiv has become a ghost town due to Russian bombardment. US and 17 other countries have appealed Hamas to release the hostages. Associated Press reported Hamas won independent Palestinian state. Israeli bombing killed 6 Palestinians in Gaza yesterday. Haiti Prime Minister resigned. A 9-member council has been formed to run the country. Mr. Blinken is in China. City entrance fee for Venus for the tourists. Now the news in detail.
Hello and welcome to Daybreak here on France 24. We'll be with you until 10 a.m. Paris time. These are this morning's main news headlines. Staging sit-ins and mounting boisterous demonstrations, the activists are calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Police begin to push back more forcefully as pro-Palestinian protests spread across college campuses in the United States. We've been locked out of the violence-racked country for months. Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry steps down as a transitional council is installed to prepare for eventual presidential elections. And with parts of the country hit by a scorching heatwave, and after low turnout was reported in the first round of the vote, a second phase of polling is underway in India's general elections. We'll be posting live to our correspondent in Uttar Pradesh, Havni Mitra. Good to have you with us. Well, first this hour to the US, where pro-Palestinian protests have been spreading to more college campuses as authorities appear to be running out of patience and police begin to push back more forcefully. Students and activists have been staging sit-ins and rallies as they demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Riot officers used chemical irritants and tasers at one university, while hundreds were arrested at colleges in Los Angeles, Boston and Austin, Texas, where around 2,000 people gathered again on Thursday. Lauren Burstecker has the latest.
Why are you doing this? Give me a reason why you're doing this. I go to this school.
Scenes of chaos on the Emory University campus in Atlanta as police in riot gear, some holding semi-automatic rifles, cleared out a camp of pro-Palestinian protesters. A heavy use of force, which many students felt was unjustified and disproportionate.
This is insane. I just saw police use unnecessary violence for peaceful protesters. I saw police knock students to the ground.
From Los Angeles to Austin, Texas to New York, students across the U.S. continued to protest against the war in Gaza. Many were calling on their schools, but also on the U.S. government to divest from Israel, days after the Senate approved an additional $26 billion in aid for the Jewish state.
I'm here because I'm tired of my taxpayer money, everybody's taxpayer money, funding the killing of innocents.
The latest wave of protests triggered a heavy-handed security response, with universities in some cases calling on police to forcefully evacuate students. They've accused the protesters of trespassing and of fueling anti-Semitism on campus, an argument reiterated by the U.S. State Department on Thursday.
As part of these demonstrations happening on various college campuses, happening in various places, we have seen rhetoric, language, commentary that is incendiary, that is offensive, that is rooted in anti-Semitism.
Protesters and activists have denied accusations of anti-Semitism and say they're being silenced for expressing a political opinion. On Thursday, a pro-Palestinian group filed a civil rights complaint against Columbia University following the arrest of over 100 demonstrators earlier this week.
The University of Southern California cancelled its main graduation ceremony as the protest spread, and more than 90 people were arrested on campus. Officials elsewhere are concerned that the demonstrations could disrupt plans for commencement ceremonies that are due to take place next month. Other universities are rewriting their rules to ban encampments and moving final exams to new locations. Our correspondent, Louis Kiela, was at the protest there.
It's been a pretty quiet morning on the USC campus. Just a few students sitting in the grass with a banner saying bombings are not self-defense, as a way to criticize the actions of Israel in Gaza, but nothing comparable to what happened the day before with the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, arresting more than 80 protesters who wanted to set up a camp on campus, which USC does not allow. USCLA, the other big university on the west side of Los Angeles, has also seen students trying to set up a camp on Thursday morning. But the climate is a little bit different in USC because of a controversial decision made by the university a few days ago, which was canceling the speech of the valedictorian student, the student that's selected to represent all of his schoolmates during this 2024 school year, because of organizations criticizing statements he had on social media, pro-Palestinian statement. The university justified the decision out of safety for the thousands of students who are supposed to attend the commencement ceremony next month. Always a big deal on American campuses, but we learned this morning that the university decided to cancel the event altogether, again out of safety.
Washington is describing it as an extraordinary display of unanimity. The US and 17 other nations, including France, Brazil and Canada, have issued a joint appeal for Hamas to immediately release sick, elderly and wounded hostages as a pathway to end the crisis in Gaza. The 18 countries all have citizens held by the militant group. Well, the statement came as Egypt asked for a follow-up meeting with Israel as part of renewed efforts to mediate a truce deal. Well, let's get some reaction from the families of some of those still being held in Gaza.
Today, a joint statement was released by the leaders of the United States, Argentina, Austria, Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, Colombia, Denmark, France, Germany, Hungary, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Serbia, Spain, Thailand, and the United Kingdom, calling for the immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas in Gaza for more than 200 days.
It's the time not just to make statements, it's time not just to say words, it's time to make actions, and to understand that we are dealing with a radical terror organization that only wants to destroy us. And it's time to the world to wake up and do everything that in its power to bring those people back.
Israel is still reeling from the October 7th Hamas massacre. One of the consequences has been a heightened awareness of the existential threat facing the country. Demographers are already predicting a post-war baby boom. Our senior reporter Catherine Norstrand has been meeting some of them.
This is our son. As you see, he was always smiling. Always with his smile.
Omri Ram was 28 years old when he was murdered trying to flee Israel's Nova Music Festival on October the 7th. His parents are still in mourning for their surf-loving son, but they've also found a glimmer of hope.
What we have in mind is someday to have a granddaughter, to take her to surf on his surfboard at the ocean, and we believe that we will be able to do that someday. Yeah.
Menashe and Merav Ram hope to let their son's legacy live on by using his sperm, extracted in the hours after his body was recovered.
אני חושבת שבגלל שעומרי מאוד אהב ילדים ומאוד רצה משפחה, הוא היה ילד מאוד מאוד משפחתי, זה היה ברור לי שהוא היה רוצה ילדים והיה רוצה המשכיות.
זה משהו שהוא מאוד עמוק אצל כל יהודי. אחרי שעברנו את השואה, הרצון לא להיכחד ולהמשיך את החיים.
וזה שיש לנו את האפשרות להמשיך ולגדול ולהתחזק ולהביא ילדים מאלה שאינם, זה ניצחון גם לנו כמדינת ישראל וגם לנו כמשפחה וגם לאלה שאינם פה, גם בשבילם.
Posthumous sperm retrieval became legal in Israel in 2003, but was extremely rare. While major legal and ethical questions remain, leading medics in the field tell us demand has soared since October the 7th.
Since the war started, it gave a huge wind for the whole process. The army started to let the families know about the option. So quite a lot of soldiers that died will do the sperm retrieval upon the request. Israel is a leading country in the whole issue of IVF and reproduction. So doing it after death, I think this is another step in the process.
Overall, Israel is a fertility powerhouse. It's a huge sector here. Israel performs the most IVF treatments in the world per capita, more than 50,000 a year. The government funds limitless cycles for some women up to age 45, and it's permitted with imported donor eggs up to age 57. Egg freezing is very common.
The pressure from the public is very, very serious because people, and especially women, want to have families. In Israel, the social laws are more flexible, and because of the public demand, the authorities, the government, help them to have at least 2 children. We help them to do whatever we can.
Demographics have long been an existential question in Israel, which has the highest birth rate of any developed country in the world, more than 3 children per woman, over 6 in Orthodox Jewish communities. And with many people in Israel currently feeling under threat, continuity and survival are again coming to the fore.
In other world news, it reopens a painful chapter in America's reckoning with sexual misconduct by powerful figures. New York's highest court has overturned Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction with a ruling that shocked and disappointed women who celebrated historic gains during the Me Too era and left those who testified in the case bracing for a retrial. The court found the original trial judge had unfairly allowed testimony against the former Hollywood producer based on allegations that weren't part of the case. The 72-year-old will remain behind bars because he was convicted of another rape in Los Angeles in 2022. Let's get some reaction now from a lawyer who represents some of the women who've accused him.
In a new trial, the same 3 people who complained that Harvey Weinstein sexually assaulted them would be called upon to testify again. And that is a very significant burden on these 3 women.
A new political chapter for Haiti. A transitional council has been set up to prepare for eventual presidential elections there and to choose a new prime minister after Ariel Henry resigned. He'd been locked out of the violence-racked country for months. It's hoped the move will quell the spiralling gang violence that's killed thousands in the Caribbean nation. But gunfire was reported as the 9-member council was being sworn in at the National Palace. With the latest, here's Josephine Joly.
With gunfire ringing out near the National Palace, a ceremony for Haiti's new government had to relocate to the outskirts of the city. At the Prime Minister's office, the new transitional council gathered for the first time and toasted one another, hoping they can turn things around. Outside on the streets, the police are trying to restore order to the capital, which has been largely under the control of armed gangs.
Haiti, our country, finds itself at a crossroads in search of suitable solutions to emerge from this crisis, which has lasted too long and whose consequences are harmful population. So today is an important day. In the life of our dear republic, this day, in fact, opens the prospect of a solution whose fundamental objective, it must be remembered, is to address the multidimensional crisis the country is experiencing with a view to achieving a definitive outcome.
The ceremony follows the resignation of outgoing Prime Minister Ariel Henry this Thursday, a month after armed gangs had blocked his return to the country. In a letter shared on social media, Henry said his administration had served the nation in difficult times.
I thank all of those who had the courage to face such challenges with me. I sympathize with the loss and suffering endured by our countrymen and women during this period.
For months, the country has been in chaos, with at least 2,500 people killed or injured in gang-related violence so far this year. The security situation in Haiti has also displaced thousands and caused catastrophic hunger.
Millions of voters are heading to the polls as India's 6-week election juggernaut resumes this Friday. Incumbent Prime Minister Narendra Modi is widely expected to win a third term in the ballots, which concludes in early June. But turnout in the first round of voting last week dropped nearly 4 points to 66%, with speculation in Indian media outlets that higher than average temperatures were partly to blame. Well, intense heat disrupted campaigning again earlier this week. For the very latest, let's cross live now to our correspondent in Noida in Uttar Pradesh. Pavni Mittal is standing by for us. Great to have you with us this morning. Pavni, you're at a polling station there. Voting is taking place across 13 states from today. Talk to us about some of the main battlegrounds there.
Good morning, and yes, polling opened just under 3 hours ago, and I'm at one of the stations where people have been pouring in all morning, and we're expecting more people to come as the day progresses. Now, more than 150 million people are eligible to vote today. Parts of the state of Manipur, which is in India's northeast, will be redoing voting because last week there were reports of violence and booth capturing. This area has been embroiled in ethnic conflict for nearly a year now. As far as battleground states are concerned, look, the BJP does have an upper hand in the sense it is in power in most of the seats contesting today, but all eyes are on the opposition, and that's for two reasons. One is many of the seats that will be going in for election today, or are going in for election today, are in southern India, where the BJP is not in government at the state level. The second reason is that one of the star campaigners of this election and of the opposition is contesting today. Rahul Gandhi is from the Congress party. He comes from a family of former prime ministers. He is Prime Minister Modi's most vocal critic. He has held 2 nationwide marches over the last 2 years, attracting crowds of thousands of people. And last year, he was expelled from Parliament after he was actually convicted of making defamatory comments against people belonging to Prime Minister Modi's community. He was later reinstated.
Now, as you say, turnout was down the first round of voting. Pavni, what can we take from that, and what are we expecting in the second phase of polling?
Yeah, that has been a bit of a controversy when it comes to this democratic exercise. 66% voter turnout in phase 1. What was noticed by analysts is that a lot of the drop in the turnout compared to the 2019 election were in BJP-governed seats and states. Now, analysts are obviously debating what this means for the BJP in particular, but they all agree that wherever this goes, it is a bit of a loss for democracy. Some of this has been attributed to heatwave-like conditions. I mean, it is quite hot over here. The second reason is that there is a possibility that voters may not be so enthused to come out and vote, given that Prime Minister Modi is widely expected to win. Now, the other controversy that is important to talk about is that the election agency has now responded to complaints against Prime Minister Modi and Rahul Gandhi for their speeches. Prime Minister Modi particularly has been accused of making Islamophobic comments. The agency has asked the political parties and their presidents to respond to these allegations by Monday.
Pavni, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us. That's our correspondent, Pavni Mittal, joining us there from Noida in Uttar Pradesh. Well, the wildly ambitious ceremony is proving to be a massive security challenge. Further anti-terrorism measures are to be put in place by authorities here in Paris to safeguard the Olympics opening ceremony on the River Seine. The city's police chief says the rules will apply to all buildings along the route, meaning people who work and live there will be subject to background security checks. Meanwhile, the flame that will burn during the Games has been spending the night at the ancient Acropolis in Athens a week before it's handed over to organisers here in France. Selena Sykes has the story.
An unprecedented security operation for an unprecedented opening ceremony.
With 92 days to go, our goal for the opening ceremony is still the same, to put on an unprecedented show that will be watched by 220,000 people on the upper banks and 100,000 people on the lower banks of the Seine. A ceremony running over a 6-kilometer course that's never been seen before.
Paris 2024 organisers wanted to make a splash when promising to open the Olympics with a spectacle along the River Seine, in what would be the first opening ceremony to take place outside of a stadium in the history of the Games. But their big ambitions are causing jitters in a city that knows firsthand the threat of terrorism. French authorities unveiled on Thursday more detailed security plans for the 26th of July. Around 20,000 people who live and work along the Seine will be the most affected.
Everyone who wants to enter will be systematically investigated and will need authorization from the police.
A security zone around the Seine will be in place from the 18th of July, 8 days before the opening ceremony. During that period, security measures will effectively cut Paris into two, warned the head of Paris police. Security checks of properties overlooking the Seine, the closure of metros and roads to traffic, as well as stop and searches of individuals and vehicles are just some of the other precautions, all with the aim of pulling off an Olympic ceremony like no other.
You're watching Daybreak here on France 24. Do stay with us.
Good evening, I'm Amina Vaz. Jeff Bennett is away. On the NewsHour tonight, the Supreme Court weighs possible immunity for Donald Trump while the former president's hush money trial continues. A New York appeals court overturned the rape conviction of former film producer Harvey Weinstein. And 2 years into Russia's bombardment of Kharkiv, we report from Ukraine's second largest city as they struggle to hold off Russia's advance.
The goal of the Russians is to destroy the sovereignty of Ukraine. Kharkiv is one of the pillars of Ukraine.
Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the News Hour. On the very last day of arguments, the U.S. Supreme Court heard debate over one of its most consequential cases, whether a former president is immune from prosecution for official actions taken while in office. Outside the court this morning, protesters gathered dressed as kangaroos and holding signs reading things like "Trump is not immune." Inside, arguments were heard on an appeal brought by former President Donald Trump, who's being prosecuted by special counsel Jack Smith for attempting to overthrow the results of the 2020 election. John Yang is here now in studio with more. John?
Anna, it was a big day for former President Trump in a number of courts. In addition to the nearly 3 hours of oral arguments in his immunity case at the Supreme Court, a grand jury in Arizona indicted several of his closest allies for allegedly trying to subvert the 2020 election. Following all of this is the News Hour's William Brangham and our Supreme Court analyst, Marcia Coyle. They were both in the Supreme Court this morning. Marcia, remind us the basics. What is President Trump's argument and what's the government's response?
Okay, John, very simply, President Trump is asking the court to say that a former president has absolute immunity for conduct involving his or her official acts, and that immunity stretches all the way to the outer perimeter of his office. And he's looking to certain clauses in the Constitution and certain precedents to bolster that argument. But the government is saying, basically, there is no immunity clause in the Constitution. It does not extend to the president's official acts, although the government said today there is a small core group of powers that are in Article 2 of the Constitution, like the pardon power, the veto power, that are off limits to criminal law.
And William, the justices spent a lot of time today exploring how to distinguish between a private act and a public act. And we've got Justice Elena Kagan posing a hypothetical to Trump's attorney.
He was the president. He is the commander-in-chief. He talks to his generals all the time, and he told the generals, "I don't feel like leaving office. I want to stage a coup." Is that immune?
If it's an official act, there needs to be impeachment and conviction beforehand because the framers viewed that kind of
if it's an official act.
Thanks, John.
Donald Trump's legal challenges also start our day's other news. At his hush money trial in New York, a former tabloid publisher offered more details about burying stories in 2016 that could have hurt then-candidate Trump. David Pecker described the so-called catch-and-kill schemes, one involving a former Playboy model who claimed she had an affair with Trump. Also today, prosecutors said Trump violated a gag order 4 more times. That brings the total to 15. The judge has not yet ruled on that matter. The U.S. and 17 other nations have issued a joint appeal for Hamas to release the roughly 130 hostages still believed to be held by the group. The statement insisted that, quote, the deal on the table to release the hostages would bring an immediate and prolonged ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas said it would not be influenced by the appeal. That comes a day after Hamas released an undated video of American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg Polin. Today, the State Department said the video underscores the urgency of reaching an agreement.
It is high time that every hostage be released. There has been a deal on the table that Hamas continues to move the goalposts for. And so we would stress the dire circumstance and the dire importance for this to be done and to be done so immediately.
Also today, a Hamas official told the Associated Press that the group would agree to a truce if a Palestinian state is established. The Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu has said it is opposed to such a scenario. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes killed at least 6 people in the southern city of Rafah. The early morning attacks reduced 3 houses to rubble. At least 2 children and a local journalist were reported among the dead. And in Washington, mourners gathered at the National Cathedral to honor 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers killed in Gaza earlier this month by a series of Israeli airstrikes. Sheikh Jose Andres said they represented the, quote, best of humanity. In Haiti, Ariel Henry has resigned as prime minister after months of gang violence left more than 2,500 people dead or injured between January and March. A 9-member transitional council is now tasked with selecting a new leader in cabinet. The interim prime minister, a holdover from Henry's government, said the crisis has gone on far too long.
Haiti, notre pays.
Haiti, our country, is at a crossroads in the search for solutions to overcome this multi-dimensional political crisis, the consequences of which are detrimental to the population, to property, and both public and private infrastructures.
The White House called the council a, quote, critical step toward free and fair elections in Haiti. The Federal Communications Commission voted to reinstate so-called net neutrality rules today. The regulations were first introduced during the Obama era. They treat broadband service like a utility, similar to phones and water, meaning they can be regulated. FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel stressed the importance of the ruling, saying, quote, every consumer deserves internet access that is fast, open, and fair. This is common sense. In Baltimore, a cargo ship exited the harbor today for the first time since the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed last month. Maritime traffic has been limited since the cargo ship Dolly lost power in late March and crashed into the bridge. 6 road workers were killed in that crash. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is pushing Chinese officials on what the U.S. considers Beijing's unfair trade practices. In China, Blinken pressed Shanghai's highest official on the need for a, quote, level playing field. Asked about Blinken's comments, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin stood by his nation's economic policies.
China has always carried out economic and trade cooperation in accordance with the principles of the market and has always been firmly supportive of the multilateral trading system and fully implements the rules of the World Trade Organization.
Blinken next heads to Beijing, where he's scheduled to meet with China's foreign minister on Friday. The U.S. economy grew at its slowest pace in 2 years to start 2024 as consumer spending pulled back. The Commerce Department reported GDP growth of 1.6% in the first quarter compared to the same period last year. That is less than expected. And it's down from 3.4% growth rate in the final months of 2023. That weaker than expected economic data sent a shiver through Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 375 points to close at 38,085. The Nasdaq dropped just over 100 points, and the S&P 500 gave back 23. And Venice has become the first city in the world to charge an entrance fee. Day trippers arriving between 8:30 a.m. and 4 p.m. will have to pay roughly $5 on peak weekdays. It's part of a pilot program to help curb over-tourism. Single-day visitors make up the majority of the crowds in Venice. Hundreds of locals protested the new fees today. They say it won't discourage mass tourism. Still to come on the NewsHour, protests against Israel's war in Gaza spread across college campuses nationwide. The EPA unveils new rules curtailing emissions from coal power plants. And a new book on the groundbreaking career of Barbara Walters.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
New York's highest court has overturned Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction, a stunning reversal in the landmark case of the Me Too movement. In a 4-3 decision, the Court of Appeals said the trial judge's decision to allow witnesses to claim Weinstein assaulted them, but not include those witnesses' allegations in the charges, precluded Weinstein from having a fair trial. Weinstein's lawyers commended the court earlier today for what they called a tremendous victory for criminal defendants.
There are some people who are very unpopular in our society, but we still have to apply the law fairly to them. And in this courthouse behind us...
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Campus protests against Israel's war in Gaza are continuing to grow across the U.S. The University of Southern California announced today it's canceling its main commencement ceremony next month. Encampments are now in place in at least 20 colleges, and hundreds of demonstrators have been arrested in the last several days at multiple schools, including the University of Texas, Ohio State, and Emory University. Amid police confrontations, multiple arrests, and large demonstrations, Emory University today became the latest flashpoint in a wave of pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses. Early this morning at Boston's Emerson University, violence erupted as police cleared a student encampment. More than 100 were arrested. Authorities say 4 officers were injured. That followed this clash at the University of Southern California. Officers there say protesters refused to remove their encampments. The protesters say they were provoked.
What we just saw was an act of USC acting aggressively and failing to defend.
Daniel Diermeyer joining us tonight. Chancellor, thank you very much for your time.
Sure, thank you.
In recent weeks, Russia has ramped up its airstrikes on Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine, a city already facing non-stop bombing since the full-scale invasion more than 2 years ago. This latest campaign has left the 1.3 million residents of Ukraine's second-largest city worried about what comes next as the war reaches a critical juncture. My colleagues and I traveled to Kharkiv when we were in Ukraine last week to file this report. Despite Russia's relentless attempts to derail daily life, she answers quickly and with a smile, everything. The Environmental Protection Agency has finalized a long-awaited set of regulations regarding proposed limits on fossil-fueled power plant emissions. But these new rules could mean the end of the coal industry as a source of electricity generated in the United States. Stephanie Tsai has more.
Fossil fuel power stand and last the test of time. We will see. Bloomberg's Jennifer Deloe, thank you so much. Thank you.
Barbara Walters became an icon of the news media industry, rising through the ranks to become one of the country's first and most successful female television journalists. But her enormous professional success often came at great personal cost. Her life is the focus of a revealing new book I discussed recently with author Susan Page called The Rule Breaker: The Life and Times of Barbara Walters. Susan Page, welcome back to the NewsHour.
Great to be here.
So, Barbara Walters, The Life and Times of Barbara Walters. Susan Page, thank you so much. Great to speak with you.
Thank you.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
On this Thursday night, conviction overturned. An appeal court rules mistakes were made in the rape trial of disgraced producer Harvey Weinstein. The stunned reaction from his accusers.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal.
Billions for an electric future.
This is a game changer for the country and for the auto sector.
What the latest big investment of public money could mean for EV manufacturing in Canada. Absolute immunity. The U.S. Supreme Court weighs arguments over whether Donald Trump is immune from prosecution. Plus, he was the soundtrack to Saturday Night Hockey. The legacy of Canadian broadcasting legend Bob Cole.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. 4 years after he was convicted of rape, New York State's top court has ruled disgraced movie producer Harvey Weinstein did not receive a fair trial. It means his conviction, which was pivotal in the Me Too movement, has been overturned. The New York Court of Appeals found the trial judge made a crucial mistake. This does not mean that Weinstein is a free man, but the decision has stunned the many women who broke their silence and accused Weinstein, who was once the most powerful producer in Hollywood. Eric Sorensen has our top story tonight.
At the center of public anger in the Me Too movement was Harvey Weinstein. When Weinstein was convicted of sexually assaulting 2 women in 2020, it seemed like a turning point for the legal system that historically has intimidated victims and held relatively few accountable.
And just in all that we saw justice today,
and this could happen.
To bolster their case, prosecutors had called several other women to testify that they'd been abused by Weinstein. Today, New York's Court of Appeals ruled it was wrong to do so. In a 4-3 vote, the High Court concluded the trial court erroneously admitted testimony of uncharged alleged prior sexual acts against persons other than the complainants of the underlying crimes, in effect prejudicing the jury.
The jury was looking at Harvey Weinstein, looking at his character, this propensity to act, and not looking at the crimes that were charged in New York.
Activists say the legal system has let women down again.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal. And our institutions betray survivors of male sexual violence.
Others worry that abused women will be discouraged from coming forward.
It's enraging, certainly, and thinking about what it's going to mean for all of those victim survivors and any victim survivor who wants to engage with the criminal legal system.
Weinstein's lawyer praised the High Court.
Today's legal ruling is a great day for America.
Weinstein was one of the world's top movie producers. He controlled the career paths of countless celebrities and wannabe stars. Hollywood turned away from rumors about his conduct. Only later did accusations publicly emerge from scores of women of assault and abuse.
We are devastated for the survivors who are connected to this case.
Still, Weinstein will not get out of jail. It's expected he'll be transferred from this prison in New York to another in California, where a 2022 conviction for rape still stands. And for women wanting a legal system more responsive to victims of sexual violence, the fight goes on.
Male sexual violence may knock us down, but we get right back up.
Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A jury has been selected in the trial of a Winnipeg man suspected of killing 4 Indigenous women. 9 women and 3 men were chosen, along with 2 alternates. Jeremy Skibdicki is charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and a 4th unidentified woman the community has named Buffalo Woman. Her body has not been found. The partial remains of Contois were discovered in 2022. Police believe the remains of the 2 other women are in the Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg. Skibdicki has pleaded not guilty. The trial is set to start next week. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calls it the largest auto investment in Canadian history. It is a $15 billion plan to build new Honda auto plants in Ontario. The project promises to create about 1,000 jobs, but mining critical materials is key to its operation. Mike Drolet reports on how the project could re-energize Canada's auto sector if it can clear all the roadblocks.
This is the end of the line at the Honda plant in Alliston, Ontario. Every minute, like clockwork, the finishing touches are put on a new vehicle. It's a sight to behold, yet few visitors to the plant took notice because of what was being announced just meters away.
This is big, folks. This is historic. This is a game changer for the country and for the auto sector.
The groundbreaking deal will see Honda invest $15 billion into 4 new manufacturing plants. The company's first electric vehicle assembly plant, a standalone EV battery plant, as well as 2 facilities that will focus on the critical mineral side of the equation, likely to be built in Northern Ontario. Canada's auto sector, which not long ago was considered to be on life support, has been re-energized with investments in Windsor and St. Thomas, Ontario, as well as just outside of Montreal.
I think what we've seen in the last 2 years is the total sum of investment of the last 40 years repeated in a very short period.
But none of this has been exactly cheap for taxpayers. VW was promised $13 billion in subsidies, Stellantis $15, and Northvolt another $7. And now Honda has been promised upwards of $5 billion in tax credits. The argument is that without these investments, these companies would have set up shop elsewhere.
But again, countries around the world are trying to throw money at different companies to try and draw in investment. And yes, we need to be responsible and competitive with that. But that's not why Honda and other great companies are continuing to choose to invest in Canada.
Money aside, the lure for automakers is proximity to critical minerals like lithium and cobalt needed for EV batteries, a sector of the industry that's long been dominated by China. Canada is a decade behind in critical mining, yet the hope is that partnering with automakers will kick it into high gear.
You're absolutely right that there are more pieces to this puzzle than just opening up a plant and getting some parts suppliers in place. You need to go right down that value chain, right to the mines and to the critical materials. And that's something that, frankly, we don't have a ton of experience in as the automotive industry, but that's why you're seeing these partnerships develop right to the mines with the automakers themselves.
Mike, how realistic is it that enough critical minerals will soon be mined in Canada to make that end-to-end supply chain dream a reality?
Well, for the first time ever, Bloomberg has put Canada at the top of its lithium-ion battery supply chain rankings, ahead of China. And yes, Canada has a pair of sites operating in Manitoba and Quebec, but as of today, not a single lithium mine is operational in Ontario. And that has to change if plants like these are going to hope to get the critical minerals they need to produce batteries. Donna?
Okay, Mike Drolet in Alliston, Ontario, thanks. It's only April, and there are already more than 170 fires burning in BC and Alberta. This fire near Chetwynd, BC, prompted an evacuation order last night. It's since been downgraded to an alert, but the fire is still burning out of control. In Alberta, 64 new fires started this week. They're all now either under control or out. Because it is so dry, fire restrictions and burn bans have been imposed in both provinces. Alberta's UCP government is pushing ahead with legislation that will widely expand its powers, allowing it to step into local councils and fire individual members and compel councils to repeal bylaws the province doesn't like. Calgary's mayor says it has the potential to change the face of municipal government.
But I'm left asking why they've inserted themselves into municipal government in a manner that actually strips the voting public's right to elect the council that they believe is the best to serve them.
Alberta's municipal affairs minister claims the new powers are justified to ensure fair elections and accountability from municipal leaders. He says they'll only be used as a last resort, and the criteria for removing councillors would be decided by Premier Danielle Smith's cabinet on a case-by-case basis. He says the province needs the legislation to ensure municipalities are governing affairs that are within their jurisdiction. The Ontario First Nation of Aamjiwnaang is reporting new extremely high readings of the cancer-causing chemical benzene in the air, and late today the chief declared a local state of emergency in the community because of what he calls the ongoing and excessive discharge of benzene. Residents there have long complained air pollution from industrial activity makes them sick, and today the First Nation said governments aren't doing enough to protect its people.
Plastic pollution has been able to increase in my nation due to lack of regulations that would protect our rights and our health from plastic pollution.
Ontario's Environment Ministry says the Ineos Styrolution plant, meters from the First Nation, is the primary source of past benzene exposure on the north side of the community. The ministry issued a provincial order giving the company 1 week to provide a written plan to reduce benzene emission levels. The plant has been temporarily shut down since the weekend. Whether or not former American presidents are immune from prosecution is the question at the heart of a hearing at the U.S. Supreme Court. The case centers on former President Donald Trump and whether immunity shields him from criminal charges in the attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. But the implications are far broader. As Neetu Garcha reports, what the court decides will shape U.S. democracy for years to come.
Heavy with references to theoretical assassination attempts and bribery, much of this historic proceeding revolved around the debate over what constitutes official presidential conduct, with questions like, how about if a president orders the military to stage a coup? Of the 9 justices hearing the case, 3 were nominated by Donald Trump during his presidency. Conservative Justice Samuel Alito brought up the old saw about indicting a ham sandwich, referring to the belief indictments are easy to secure and don't mean a likelihood of guilt. Alito adding, this case will have effects that go far beyond this particular prosecution.
The seriousness of these cases couldn't be higher. They raise the most fundamental question in all of American history, which is the president above the law and under what circumstances?
Trump's lawyer faced questions like, if there's no threat of criminal prosecution, what prevents the president from just doing whatever he wants? Contrary to prosecutors, Trump's lawyer argued a former president has to be impeached and convicted before he can be criminally prosecuted.
The court seems likely to reject immunity in all circumstances, but possibly recognize some immunity for core executive functions.
Justice Sonia Sotomayor made clear her opposition to the Trump legal team's position, saying she was having a hard time envisioning immunity for a president who creates and submits false documents, orders the assassination of a political rival, and any number of other criminal acts. As protesters like Lori Woodward Garcia gathered outside the court, a key question remains: when will a decision be made?
This Supreme Court decision could throw our country and the world, quite frankly, into tyranny.
A ruling could require several months of lower court proceedings. While skepticism towards Trump's claims of absolute immunity was clear in court, the timing of the Supreme Court's decision is still unclear. Regardless of what the court decides, if Trump is re-elected in November, he may try to pardon himself. Donna?
All right, Neetu Garcha in Washington, thanks. There's another legal matter former President Donald Trump is facing, his criminal trial over hush money payments to an adult film star. Trump was cheered by supporters before heading into the courthouse. Former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker testified about catch and kill schemes to suppress negative stories about Trump. He said he paid to buy the story of former Playboy model Karen McDougal, who said she'd had an affair with Trump, and then killed the story months before the 2016 election. And he said he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars buying stories involving prominent people such as Arnold Schwarzenegger and Tiger Woods. And he said he alerted Trump's lawyer when he heard Stormy Daniels was looking to tell her story about a sexual encounter with Trump in the weeks before the election. Pecker said he turned her down, but realized how damaging it could be and told Trump's lawyer he should buy it and take it off the market. A joint appeal to bring hostages home, coming up the international push for Hamas to free hostages ahead of an imminent Israeli offensive.
Yango. Different from a taxi.
Offensive. Protests against Israel's siege on Gaza appear to be intensifying on U.S. college campuses. This is Emerson College in Boston. Police and protesters faced off there early this morning. More than 100 people were arrested. Officers were clearing a tent encampment that had been in place since the weekend. And in Austin, large crowds gathered for a second day at the University of Texas. About 30 people were arrested there yesterday. Demonstrators are asking their universities to cut ties with or reveal their involvement with companies that are doing business with Israel or profiting off the war in Gaza. In Gaza, there were more airstrikes on the southern city of Rafah today. At least 5 people there were killed, including a 7-year-old boy and his father, who was working for a Belgian aid agency. More than half of Gaza's 2.3 million people have sought refuge in Rafah, where Israel is conducting near daily raids as it prepares for a full-scale ground invasion. Canada, the U.S., and 16 other countries whose citizens were abducted by Hamas on October 7th issued a joint statement today. It says, we call for the immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas in Gaza for over 200 days. It says, we emphasize that the deal on the table to release the hostages will bring an immediate and prolonged ceasefire in Gaza that would facilitate a surge of additional necessary humanitarian assistance. As Mike Armstrong reports, every day without a ceasefire compounds the suffering for civilians in Gaza and families of the hostages.
I mean, initially, we were just crying.
That was the first reaction to seeing their son alive. The first proof of life for the parents of hostage Hirsch Goldberg Pollen came in a video released by Hamas. They've given permission for media to use the video. In it, their son is missing a hand, but seeing him alive means there's hope.
He certainly doesn't look like himself, but it was amazing to see him and amazing to see that he speaks like himself with clarity and strength.
Families and friends of hostages protested Thursday outside Israel's military headquarters. The country's war cabinet was meeting inside, according to reports, discussing plans for a ground invasion of southern Gaza. Protesters want the focus instead on the hostages, people like this woman's father.
He's very funny, and he's very lovable, and I miss his hug, I miss his advice, I miss him every day.
Israeli officials believe Hamas is still holding 133 hostages in Gaza. Some were freed in a November truce. Talks have continued on and off to at least get the sick, elderly, and injured out. Negotiators have met in Paris, Cairo, and Doha. A senior U.S. official said Thursday there may be an avenue to an agreement, but Israeli officials say they've been close with Hamas before.
They walk away from any potential deal.
The families of the hostages are praising the 18 countries that signed a joint appeal for Hamas to release their loved ones. Among those speaking Thursday, the parents of Hirsch Goldberg, Poland.
We are hopeful and prayerful that this is the beginning of a galvanizing force.
While the joint appeal does not appear to be having an impact on Hamas, a spokesman for the group says it will not be influenced by the statement and called on the U.S. to force Israel, quote, to end its aggression. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Moulin Rouge mishap ahead. What's missing from this Paris landmark? One of the most famous landmarks in Paris is a little worse for wear. The blades of the windmill on the Moulin Rouge Cabaret Club fell off overnight. The first 3 letters of the sign are missing too. Nobody was injured and there's no sign of vandalism. The owner says it will be repaired. The club has been a fixture of Parisian nightlife since it opened in 1889 and it's known as the birthplace of the can-can dance. 2 of those military horses that broke loose and galloped through London yesterday are in worse condition than first thought. The horses named Vita and Quaker are in serious condition. They were operated on last night. Quaker was later transferred to an equine hospital. They were taking part in routine exercise when they were spooked by construction noise, threw off their riders and took off, smashing into a taxi and breaking the windshield of a bus. 3 soldiers thrown off were hospitalized. They are expected to return to duty soon. The other horses involved are said to be recovering well.
Here's another shot, Anderson right in. He fired!
He was hockey's voice for more than 50 years. Next, remembering Bob Cole. They say no one called a game like Bob Cole. If you're Canadian and you love hockey, you don't need me to tell you who he was and why his mastery of play-by-play was legendary. Bob Cole died Wednesday night in St. John's, Newfoundland, surrounded by family. He was 90 years old. Mackenzie Gray looks at Cole's love for the game and how fans and players loved him right back.
Look at the deal. Oh my heavens. What a goal. What a move. Brazil. Oh, baby.
For over 50 years.
Oh, my goodness. Here comes the shot. It's good. How about that? Oh, baby, for sure.
He was the soundtrack to Saturday night.
Coming after him. It's him again. Here he got it. Scores. Albertson scores, and the series is over.
Classic calls from Bob Cole, a little Newfoundlander with a big presence.
They're going home. They're going home. Yeah, they're going home.
From covering the Summit Series on radio.
Here's another shot, Anderson right in. He fired. You know, Harry.
To decades as the lead voice for Hockey Night in Canada. Even the hockey greats knew that when Bob Cole called your game, it was a big deal.
So you knew that you're at the end of the line and playing for the championship when Bob was around. It was a special moment, and nobody did it better than Bob.
It's always said the only thing that's important is the Stanley Cup.
But in a career of calls, one stood above the rest for Cole.
The Salt Lake City Joe Sakic goal. The moment was big, and the U.S. was playing Canada, and Canada hasn't won a gold medal in 50 years, and here we are. And then Joe Sakic takes off, and I just was kind of with him.
For decades, Cole himself traveled around the continent to cover the game he loved, but he still lived in St. John's despite the extra travel.
And I don't think Bob Cole will overthrow this one.
He represented his home province as the skip for Newfoundland at the 1971 and 75 Canadian Men's Curling Championship. Despite honors like being named to the Order of Canada, Cole admitted he still got nervous before a game, something even his colleagues couldn't tell.
He never took it for granted. He never thought he was bigger than the game. He always saw himself as the conduit between the fan and the game, and he loved that role. It was very special to him.
But it's millions of Canadians who remember Bob Cole as a broadcasting legend and a special part of some of their favorite memories. Mackenzie Gray, Global News, Ottawa.
Good night, everybody.
That is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is New Bonaventure, Newfoundland and Labrador. That's the Random Passage site there. I've been there, love it. Great, beautiful spot. Go visit if you can. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
This is Asia Now.
A very good morning. It's 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi, and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Milakia Silverati. Your headlines this hour. Voting is underway in the world's largest democracy as India begins phase 2 of its massive parliamentary election. 2 battleground states in the south will be in focus, Karnataka and Kerala. As that marathon election gets underway, India swelters in extreme heat like other countries in Asia. The soaring temperatures are forcing health warnings and school closures in Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Thailand.
The people united will never be divided.
And police arrest hundreds of protesters in locations across the U.S. as unrest against Israel's war in Gaza intensifies across university campuses. Well, India's election has rolled into its second stage of voting. Voters across 88 constituencies spread over 13 states and union territories are casting their ballot after polls opened this morning.
Well, the stakes are high in the world's largest democracy, with the outcome shaping not only the country's political dynamics and its governance, but also its foreign policy. And you're looking live pictures right now. All eyes are on two battleground states, Karnataka and Kerala in the south. And both are crucial for the ruling BJP to reach its intended target of a 2/3 majority in the parliament. Well, the BJP lost state elections in Karnataka last May to the Congress party and failed to win a single seat in Kerala in the 2019 general elections. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi is contesting from Kerala's Wayanad district for the second time. He won the parliamentary seat back in 2019 with a huge majority, but observers say he is now encountering some tough competition from one of his India bloc allies, the Communist Party of India. And all this comes as Mr. Gandhi and Prime Minister Narendra Modi face tough questions from the Election Commission of India after their parties accused each other of causing hatred and division during the election campaign. Mr. Modi is under fire for allegedly inciting hate speech against Muslims after referring to them as, quote, infiltrators. While Mr. Gandhi faces claims that he falsely asserted an increase in poverty in the country, and the election panel has asked both sides to respond by next Monday. Priyata Brajabasi tells us how much the allegations of hatred and division between both parties could weigh on the minds of voters.
We're just in the early stages of the 6-week-long Indian election, but political observers are already calling this election one of the most divisive and polarized elections in the history of the country. There have been complaints and allegations between parties accusing each other of violating the Election Commission's model code of conduct. Remember, the Election Commission's model code of conduct says that politicians must not appeal for votes based on communal lines that could create divisions and cause mutual hatred between communities and religions. But political observers are saying that that is what is playing out during these elections, and those very controversial statements made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Sunday against the minority Muslim community has been a game changer, and game changer in the sense that it has drawn widespread criticism, not just in the country, but has also grabbed attention abroad, and it has caused a lot of outrage in the country as well. At least that's what political observers are saying, and even amongst supporters of Mr. Modi, it has caused some amount of discomfort. Many of them have taken to social media and questioned why Prime Minister Narendra Modi had to resort to those kinds of statements at a time when he's already posed to be the front runner in these elections, and also the Election Commission's response to those comments. Of course, the opposition and the critics are saying that it is almost an inaction, because yesterday the Election Commission of India wrote a letter not to Prime Minister Narendra Modi for his comments, but to the Bharatiya Janata Party, and they have sought a response from the party president, which is a very unusual situation, because in cases like this, the Election Commission usually takes action against the leader or the campaigner in question, which was not the case here, and that has given more ammunition to critics and opposition who have been accusing the Election Commission of India of working at the behest of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party. Of course, that is a charge that the Election Commission of India has denied time and again.
And more analysis and insights coming up later this hour with Karthik Natiyappan from the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. As India heads to the second phase of polls in a marathon 6-week election, they are also battling extreme heat with millions of others in Asia. And countries are grappling with the high temperatures as officials issue heat warnings across the region. Indian authorities say they will review the impact of the heat and humidity before each round of voting to make sure it will be safe for people to vote. But the country's Weather Bureau warns that the heat wave will continue over the next few days. Well, some parts of neighbouring Bangladesh are also experiencing bone-dry weather as temperatures soared to 43 degrees Celsius. Officials have been forced to shut schools this week because of the extreme heat. The Education Ministry plans to reopen them next week, despite warnings that the severe conditions will remain. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, forecasters are predicting dangerous heat levels over the next few days, and temperatures are expected to climb as high as 47 degrees Celsius in at least 30 cities and municipalities. Well, this includes the capital Manila, where dozens of schools have shifted to online classes. Thailand is also on alert after revealing that at least 30 people have died from heat stroke this year. Bangkok's heat index, which has been at dangerous levels since Wednesday, is expected to rise above 52 degrees Celsius. The heat index measures both the humidity and wind speeds. April is typically the hottest time of the year across the region, but conditions this year have made worse by the El Niño weather phenomenon. There is a new push to get hostages out of Gaza nearly 7 months into the war, while the United States and 17 other countries have issued an appeal to Hamas to release the captives to help end the conflict. All of them have citizens held by Hamas, and they include Canada, Thailand, and the UK. Well, they stress that there is a deal on the table to free the hostages that would bring an immediate ceasefire. The deal would enable Gazans to return to their homes with assurances of shelter and aid supplies. The statement was spurred by a White House meeting with hostage families and comes just a day after President Joe Biden met Abigail Edan. The 4-year-old American was released by Hamas during a brief truce in November. It is giving new impetus to the families of hostages, and Hamas is said to be holding around 130 hostages, a quarter of whom are believed to be dead.
We are hopeful and prayerful that this is the beginning of a galvanizing force of these countries who are going to continue going forward and shout in a loud, unified way that they are not stopping until all of these hostages come home.
But Hamas is not relenting. A senior leader told Reuters that the group will not be influenced by the statement. He says the ball is in America's court because the US needs to force Israel to end its aggression. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have apparently left the city ahead of the invasion, and as many as 200,000 according to the Jerusalem Post, which cited the Israeli military, and that is about 15% of the people in Rafah. The IDF is hoping more civilians will follow suit and move to other cities such as Khan Yunis, where new tent communities have been set up. Well, the war in Gaza continues to reverberate through U.S. universities as pro-Palestinian protests spread to more college campuses.
The people united will never be divided. The people.
Fresh clashes broke out between police and students opposed to Israel's operations in Gaza. Riot officers used tear gas and tasers at one university as administrators battled to prevent occupations taking hold on their campuses. And more than 200 protesters were arrested over the past 2 days at universities in Los Angeles, Boston, and Austin, Texas. Overall, more than 530 arrests have been made in the last week across major U.S. colleges, according to Reuters tally. The demonstrators are calling for universities to separate themselves from any company advancing Israel's military efforts in Gaza, and in some cases from Israel itself. Well, the University of Southern California has cancelled its upcoming graduation ceremony, citing security concerns. Ira Spitzer has more.
The University of Southern California says new security concerns mean it now won't have enough time to prepare for the graduation ceremony, which was supposed to take place on May 10th and is usually attended by about 65,000 students and guests. Earlier in the week, Los Angeles police arrested more than 90 pro-Palestinian demonstrators on trespassing charges as they attempted to set up an encampment on USC's campus. That episode was on the minds of those who came out the next day to continue the protest, which included calls for the school to divest from organizations with ties to Israel, as well as a ceasefire in Gaza.
It's sad because it really changes our idea of safety on campus. They're supposed to be here to protect us, and in reality, they're the ones causing violence and hostility for us.
I think it's important to be able to hear our young people voicing their opinions and their feelings, and that and I feel good to be able to participate because it so saddens me to hear of so many lives being lost.
Tensions at USC had already been running high after school administrators canceled a valedictorian scheduled to speak at the graduation, citing threats it had received over her anti-Israel viewpoints, but not providing evidence of those threats. USC is one of several schools on the West Coast where protesters have joined students at East Coast schools like Columbia and Yale. Across town in Los Angeles, protesters have also set up an encampment at UCLA, and in Northern California, there is now a large pro-Palestinian encampment set up at UC Berkeley, which was one of the main centers of large student protests in the 1960s. And authorities at Cal Poly Humboldt say that school will remain closed through the weekend, with protesters who they described as non-students actually occupying several buildings on campus. Ira Spitzer, CNA, San Francisco.
And on the East Coast, Benji Haya has more from Washington, D.C. as a wave of condemnation spreads to the U.S. Capitol.
This is one of dozens of protests happening on university campuses across America. Here, students from George Washington University, faculty as well, from both this establishment but also other campuses across the United States have gathered on the main square, and their call is to free Palestine most broadly in the wake of its offensive against Gaza. But specifically, they've been telling us that they want this university to disclose and terminate any relationship that it has with companies that they say are enabling that war efforts. The message that we've been hearing is there should be no tuition for funding murder.
We're seeing student movements across the United States, across the world. 40+ universities have taken up encampments in liberated zones. And what we're seeing also is the Biden administration and the greater administration is really scared for that November vote, right? And then the student power, that student push has been really instrumental in making him realize that, hey, you need to pay attention to these students.
But comments like that, scenes like this have been dividing America. The Speaker of the House of Representatives was in New York at Columbia University on Tuesday, and he says the president should send in the military. This, he claims, is dangerous. This is not the First Amendment. This is not free expression. And he adds, demonstrations like this, quote, place a target on the backs of Jewish students in the United States.
It makes me and a lot of other Jewish students feel very unsafe, not because they are here, but simply because of what they're saying. Freedom of speech is a right that is God-given here, is given here in the United States, and everybody has a right to their own freedom of speech. But when that freedom of speech starts becoming hate speech, that's when it becomes dangerous.
There have been attempts by police at other university campuses to shut down these sorts of demonstrations. We haven't seen that here. No arrests. There's sort of been a human barrier protecting those at the very centre of the encampment, and it's unlikely the administration will get involved either. According to Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House spokesperson, the President Joe Biden believes free speech, debate, and non-discrimination on college campuses are important. Benji Haya, CNA, Washington.
Well, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says the U.S.-China relationship has stabilized, but warned that, quote, negative factors are still increasing and building. Mr. Wang made the comments before closed-door talks with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
The relationship is facing all kinds of disruptions. China's legitimate development rights have been unreasonably suppressed, and our core interests are facing challenges.
Well, China's top diplomat says sliding into conflict with the U.S. will be a lose-lose situation. He again reiterated that Washington must not interfere with China's internal affairs. Mr. Blinken stressed the need to manage responsibly their differences and voiced hope for progress in relations.
There's no substitute in our judgment for face-to-face diplomacy in order to try to move forward, but also to make sure that we're as clear as possible about the areas where we have differences, at the very least, to avoid misunderstandings, to avoid miscalculations.
Well, this is Mr. Blinken's second visit to China in less than a year. He's expected to address a range of concerns, including China's growing support for Russia's war in Ukraine, trade and Taiwan, and the disputed South China Sea. Mr. Blinken is also likely to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping before he returns to Washington later today. Neither side, though, has confirmed a meeting.
And I hope that you get more.
And your Asia Business Update is coming up next with Olivia Marzuki. Olivia, Singapore's housing prices on the rise once again?
That's right, Ella. Both private home prices as well as...
Creative Types with Virginia Trioli, Tuesday on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Today, a 26-year-old man faces court charged with the murder of an elderly man and the attempted murder of his wife in Queensland. Also ahead, family and friends farewelled Faraz Tahir, the security guard murdered in the Bondi Junction stabbing attack. New York's highest court overturns a landmark Me Too ruling, quashing one of Harvey Weinstein's rape convictions. And being loved to death, Venice begins charging tourists for entry, hoping to curb numbers and protect its iconic infrastructure. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. A Brisbane man accused of murdering an elderly man and attempting to murder his wife has had his matter heard in court. Police found the body of 74-year-old Nicholas Reeves while conducting a welfare check at their home in Burpengary East, north of Brisbane. 71-year-old Suzanne Reeves remains in hospital in a critical condition. Reporter Ariana Levy has more from Brisbane.
Well, this is a crime that shocked so many in the local community. What we do know is that police were called yesterday morning, just after 9 o'clock, to Burpengary East, as you mentioned, which is about 40 minutes north of Brisbane, to conduct a welfare check on the couple. And when they were there, they discovered the grim discovery of the body of Nicholas Reeves. Now, Nicholas Reeves, a 74-year-old alongside his wife, had suffered significant injuries from an alleged attack. Mrs. Reeves was taken to hospital and she's remained in that critical condition at Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital overnight. The ABC understands and has confirmed that the couple have lived on that street for more than 30 years and they've been described by neighbours as doting grandparents. The 26-year-old that's been charged, Frederick Steele Sayers, has had his matter briefly heard here at Lone Rivers Courthouse a little bit earlier, and he has had his matter adjourned to later in the month in July. That matter has been adjourned to Caboolture Courthouse. He did not actually physically appear. Detectives have since said that they don't believe Mr. Sayers was known to the victims. They also don't believe that this was a domestic violence related incident. There are support services, however, that have been available and offered to local residents who are in need during this difficult time. There is still a crime scene that does remain in place, not only for the house but also for the neighbouring house in question, and that crime scene is expected to remain in place for quite some time as police continue their investigations.
All right, Ariana Levy in Brisbane, thank you. A Victorian man has appeared in court charged with a number of offences following the death of a woman in the northern town of Cobram. Reporter Mike Lorigan has more from Shepparton.
39-year-old Cobram man John Tawney has fronted Shepparton Magistrates Court this morning. He is facing 13 charges related to the alleged assault of 49-year-old Cobram woman Emma Bates. Ms Bates died on Tuesday after being found with serious head and upper body injuries at her home in Cobram. In court today, police prosecuted a serious assault occurred. Court documents show Ms Bates sought help from the police for her safety and protection was granted. Through his lawyer, Mr Tawney did not apply for bail today. Tawney was wearing a green sweatshirt and gestured the middle finger as he entered and exited the courtroom. The court heard that Tawney was withdrawing from a drug dependency and he'll now appear next in court on this matter in May. Ms Bates' family have released a statement over this matter. They have described a much-loved member of their family, the fourth of 7 children, an auntie to 17 nieces and nephews, and a lover of cats. They say she dealt with health issues her entire life and was a type 1 diabetic. Her loss is tragic. That is a loss which is being felt locally today and also now nationally.
People are being urged to donate blood to honour the memory of a security guard killed during the Bondi Junction stabbing attacks, whose funeral is being held in Sydney's West. Faraz Tahir died trying to stop the attacker. Some of his family and friends have travelled from Pakistan for the funeral. The Ahmadiyya Muslim Youth Association has worked with the Red Cross to establish Faraz's gift in his memory. Meanwhile, a man falsely accused after the rampage has settled his defamation claim against 7 Network. The broadcaster has since apologised after naming university student Benjamin Cohen as the alleged attacker, saying it was human error. Mr Cohen says users who abuse a platform to target individuals or communities should be held accountable for the consequences of their actions, and platforms should be more accountable for the content they host. The terms of the settlement are confidential. An alliance of peak Islamic groups is calling on the government to review terrorism laws to remove the concept of religiously motivated terrorism. A consortium of Muslim advocacy groups has made the call in the wake of what authorities have labelled a terrorist stabbing at a church in Sydney southwest last week. Sean Tarrant-Goodwin reports from Sydney's West.
Here in Sydney's West, a spokeswoman for the National Imams Council and an alliance of other peak Islamic bodies has read a statement this morning responding to recent events, including large-scale raids across Western Sydney. Those raids resulted in 7 arrests of young men, with 2 of them charged with terrorism-related offences after the alleged stabbing at a church in Wakeley last week. It was revealed in court yesterday that police will allege extremist content, including violent videos, were found on their phones. The Imams Council claims there has been a double standard between the Wakeley church attack and the Bondi shopping mall attack, in which 6 people were killed and more than a dozen injured. They also questioned why an improvised explosive device allegedly left outside a home in Botany earlier in the year with a political message was not declared terrorism.
The use of charged language, such as religiously motivated Sunni violent extremism by the Director General of ASIO, Mike Burgess, particularly during sensitive times, is not only reckless but also fuels Islamophobia and further marginalises the Muslim community. This approach undermines social cohesion and perpetuates the stigmatisation of an entire religious group based on the actions of a few.
The Imams Council and the other groups represented here called for an immediate review into the processes that led to the raids across Sydney. They've also called for a review of the terrorism laws, aiming to eliminate the use of the term religiously motivated extremism, opting instead for other terms like politically motivated extremism.
A former New South Wales magistrate says the murder of a woman in the state's Central West this week has exposed a gap in the justice system, putting victims in regional areas at risk. The government's announced an immediate review of the bail system in response to her death, but according to former magistrate David Heilpern, the violent death of Molly Ticehurst is not an isolated case.
Molly Ticehurst was tragically murdered allegedly by her ex-boyfriend this week, just 2 weeks after he was granted bail in Orange Local Court for previous serious offences against her. Now, those serious offences included 2 counts of sexual assault against Molly Ticehurst, and he was granted bail that day by a registrar, which is an administrative position within the court. It's very different from a magistrate or a judge. They have very limited powers. They generally deal with sort of case management issues and not actually presiding over the courts. But in many regional areas, local courts are obviously under-resourced and registrars are often called upon to make these decisions. And we can reveal today that this is not an isolated case. There was another woman last year who was murdered allegedly by her ex-partner just days after he was also granted bail by a registrar in similar circumstances. And so former Magistrate David Hilpern, who has presided over those regional courts previously, has called upon the government to rectify this. He says registrars are not qualified to make these decisions and that they should be appearing via AVL instead to a magistrate in the city.
And how's the government responded to that so far?
So we know the government's already announced a review of the bail laws in response to Molly Ticehurst's murder, and they have already flagged that having these defendants appear via AVL to a magistrate either sitting in the city or elsewhere is something that they will be considering.
All right, Leah Harris, thank you. And if this report has raised any issues for you, you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline on 1-800-RESPECT, which is 1-800-737-732. It was the case that brought down one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. But in a shock reversal, Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction has been overturned. In a 4-3 decision, the New York Appeals Court found the 72-year-old had not received a fair trial.
It was a milestone moment in the Me Too movement to even see Harvey Weinstein in court. Never mind watching the disgraced movie producer sentenced to 23 years jail for rape and sexual assault. But today, that conviction came crashing down. The New York Court of Appeals finding Weinstein didn't get a fair go.
There are some people who are very unpopular in our society, but we still have to apply the law fairly to them. No one is above the law, but no one is below the law either.
The appeals court ruled that women whose allegations were not connected to the charges Weinstein was facing should not have been allowed to testify, finding the remedy for these egregious errors is a new trial.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal, and our institutions betray survivors of male sexual violence. I stand shoulder to shoulder with women who have bloody knees, because male sexual violence may knock us down, but we get right back up.
But Me Too's founder said survivors should not lose heart.
This is not a blow to the movement. It is a clarion call, and we are prepared to answer that call.
I think a lot of people are going to be, a lot of women are going to be kind of scared coming out, or they're not going to find it worth it coming out.
I got to say, it made me sick to my stomach. I'm a sexual abuse survivor myself.
It was always a legally risky move to let other women testify in the Weinstein case. The decision was made partly because many of the allegations were outside the jurisdiction or statute of limitations in New York.
This is not a decision by the court that this wasn't rape, that these weren't serious charges, that they were not credible. This was really about an evidentiary ruling in the case.
As Weinstein waits to hear about a retrial in New York, he doesn't walk free. The former Hollywood titan heads back to California to continue serving the 16-year sentence he received there for rape and other sex crimes. Barbara Miller, ABC News.
2 men have suffered significant burns at a mine site in outback Queensland. The men were working at Glencore's Mount Isa mine yesterday afternoon when a steam vent from its copper smelting operations opened next to them. One of the men suffered burns to 60% of his body from the neck down and is in an induced coma in the Royal Brisbane Hospital. The other has burns to 50% of his face and neck. Glencore says its smelting operations have been suspended. Firefighters are continuing to battle an out-of-control bushfire in the southern region of Western Australia, which they believe was deliberately lit. The blaze broke out in the shires of Denmark and Manjimup yesterday and has burnt around 2,000 hectares. An emergency warning remains in place for parts of Bowbridge, Hazelvale, North Walpole, Tinkledale and Trent. There are reports of more pilot whales showing up in shallow waters off the coast of southwest WA. It comes after about 160 were trapped in Toby Inlet near Dunsborough at the weekend. Authorities are concerned some of the freed whales are now re-stranding. Reporter Bridget MacArthur is at Quindalup.
We're so hopeful this morning, and I had literally just finished my last cross out at Toby Inlet when we had news that there was a sighting of a whale off the shore at Eagle Bay. So we headed down there. When we first heard of the sighting, it was said it was about 2 kilometres offshore. When we got there, it was about 50 to 100 metres from shore, believed to be a whale calf, a pilot whale calf. And that's something that authorities are now looking at in terms of next steps. The wildlife officer there, who was present on scene, said that they were bringing out slings. So I guess they're contemplating whether to move it. They're also monitoring whether other whales might be following suit, whether they might be following the calf in closer to shore. And there have been unconfirmed reports of a pod hanging out worryingly close, nearby, close to shore. So that's something that we're monitoring very closely, as are authorities, as are all the locals who were so invested in those rescue efforts yesterday. Really disappointing news. And on top of that, we're at Quindalup at the moment, where there have been reports of a whale carcass showing up on the beach this morning. Before it was offshore and there were some sharks hanging around, so there was a shark alert put out just warning people to steer clear of swimming in that area, as there could be more sharks present because of that whale carcass.
And considering that experts just don't know how or why whales really strand themselves, I guess it's just not possible to know how to prevent potential re-strandings. Bridget, what is the fallout of an event like this?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, and it's something that they're working on. That's really the focus that's being turned to now, as well as continuing to monitor for potential re-strandings. There are a number of marine scientists who have flocked to the area. There is a laboratory in the southwest where they're able to actually start conducting those necropsies, so autopsies on the dead whales, and they're hoping that it's sort of a grim silver lining that's able to come out of the death of those almost 30 whales confirmed yesterday, which were cleared from the shore by council. They were able to take samples of those whales before they were cleared, and they're hoping that that might contribute some way towards research to actually find out what causes these mass stranding events and whether they can be prevented.
And that part of the world certainly seems to be a hotspot for it. Bridget MacArthur at Quindalup in WA, thank you. Australian Zombie Frankham has been remembered.
At this ward in Nightingale Hospital in Kisumu, Kenya, malaria patients are bedridden. The disease is preventable and curable, but poverty makes it deadly for those who can't afford and access treatment, with public hospitals often grappling with medication shortages.
Most government facilities doesn't offer the exact medication that is what
or doing away with the sickness of the malaria parasite. But in major case, people opt to go to private facilities where they are going to get faster medication and a quality medication, but it is never pocket friendly.
The Kenya-based Universal Corporation Limited last year received the World Health Organization's approval to produce a crucial anti-malaria drug known as SPAC. Experts believe this will give a boost to the fight.
We get more investment in manufacturing of medicines and essential medicines, including antimalarials, where the problem is, then we are likely to be more effective in addressing the problem. Instead of relying heavily on importation of medicines, Africa is highly dependent on imports from India and China, and that is not sustainable.
With a new WHO-approved malaria vaccine, Kenya's health ministry hasn't said when the vaccine will be widely available, but as the country marks World Malaria Day, hope is on the horizon. About a dozen family members of people killed when a Boeing 737 MAX crashed in Ethiopia in 2019 have met with American government officials in Washington. After the meeting, family members and their lawyer held a press conference where they voiced their disappointment with the Department of Justice, whom they want to revive a criminal charge against Boeing.
It appears to us that the Justice Department is continuing to give a wealthy, powerful, well-connected corporation benefits that any other defendant in the criminal justice system would never get. If the Justice Department moves to dismiss the charges against Boeing this summer, we will fight them at every opportunity.
We've been trying to understand the decision-making, the exchange of information between the Department of Justice and Boeing that led them to make that sweetheart deal with Boeing. And we've been calling for this DPA to be reopened so that we can have a fact-finding process, make sure that the Boeing principals are criminally prosecuted.
Boeing seems to be recovering from two deadly crashes of MAX jets in 2018 and 2019 until a January 5 door plug blowout on the Alaska Airlines jetliner.
I would say to the flying public, hold them to account, because they're not holding Boeing to account and they're not holding themselves to account. And if we fail to do so, we're literally risking and putting our lives in the hands of people that don't mind playing a roulette game or, risking our lives.
The company has been reaching confidential settlements with the families of passengers who died, but the families hoped the government would reconsider prosecuting Boeing after the January 5 incident.
Well, it's with every day in Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince. A council tasked with choosing the nation's new prime minister and cabinet was sworn in Thursday. On recent day, armored vehicles rolled past the National Palace. This is the first time I see insecurity at such a level in Haiti in my entire life. Since 1986, Haiti has faced deplorable insecurity. The swearing-in ceremony of the Transitional Council did not take place at the National Palace for fear of gangs. State of emergency is enforced in the West Department, where Port-au-Prince is located until May 3rd. From a PM.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.